Hello everyone, thanks for the opportunity to come and speak today. It's herbicide resistance. It's not kind of the most exciting topic, but I don't want to just sit here and speak about another problem that we are having on our farms, but I'm also treat it as an opportunity to perhaps learn from some other places around the world, and especially my homeland. As mentioned, I'm native Australian, so if you can't understand me, I'm sorry. I'll try my best to speak Canadian. Here we go. So as mentioned, I grew up on a mixed farm on Kangaroo Island. Very nice place, and you're probably wondering what the heck's this guy doing here. We're surrounded by oceans and cricket fields and sun, and there's my little fella chasing after some pelicans on a beach. But there's more opportunity for me, right? Like I come over here in 2009 just for an experience to see how farming is done over here. From a grain farm, we have sheep and cows. Actually, I should mention that's the main reason I'm here, is to get away from sheep. I hate those stupid things, but yeah, so that's why I'm here. And I was just fortunate enough in my travel in 2009 to meet up with the Weed family at Osler, who basically just put me under their arm and gave me an opportunity to farm alongside with them. So I'm now lucky enough to rent a few quarters of land and purchase a couple now, and I've got my skin in the game, because that was always one thing that John was always on to me, is like, I've always got these ideas, and he's like, well, here, there's a quarter of land, go and put it into practice and we'll see if this actually works. So I'm here to talk about herbicide resistance. So basically, who here is grappling with herbicide resistance on their farm? Like, I'll put two hands up, but I've got one with a mic. Like, it is a problem we're having, and I'll go one step further and say, so who here sprays herbicides on their farm? You know, I think the majority of us do, and I'll basically put it out there and say, if you're spraying on your farm, you've got herbicide resistance. When you spray, you're selecting for the resistant biotype in the field. And whether you've got 25 modes of action in your tank, I don't care. Like, at the end of the day, you're going to select for that weed out there that's resistant to all 25. Now, I know that when you do add the layering in, which was what I'm really here to talk about, you can reduce the possibility, but the thing is that we are selecting, and it's proven. It's around the world. Look at Australia, for example. Been grappling with annual ryegrass for a couple of decades now, and the reason I'm so paranoid about the annual ryegrass, I know it's not a problem for us, but it's just its comparison with wild oats. We have generally a fairly big problem with wild oats in our area, and being a grass, and annual ryegrass being a grass, it's just one that I think tends to fly under the radar a little bit. There's a lot of campaigning out there for mix it up and make sure you've got active modes of action in your tank, but a lot of these chemistries you'll see might only have one mode of action for wild oats. I think we do a pretty darn good job with the broadleaf side. So that's one that scares me. And you can read the notes there. I've got to skip through this, but like a lot of the post-emergent herbicides that we take for granted here don't work down there. The efficacy is so low that they're relying heavily on soil residual herbicides to reduce the numbers, and then following that up at the end of the year with harvest weed seed control, which I'll talk about further on as well. And there's a note there just saying that I don't believe that anything we can do is going to beat this problem. Like, nature is going to win in a sense, and that's being proven in Australia too. Even with 80% of the Australian farmers adopting some sort of harvest weed seed control, they're now selecting for the weeds that they can't get in the combine, so they're crawling along the ground, right? So it's just, what I'm here to talk about is let's try and adopt as many of these techniques as we can now before we're sort of forced into them. And just the cost. I'm a farmer, so most farmers, we sit in a room, it all comes down to bottom line. So I'm always going to talk about economics because that's what generally drives us. And just on that, basically a quick note here is that, in a sense, weeds are costing Australian farmers roughly $60 an acre. So whether it's the chemicals they're spreading, which is a survey done by the Australian government showed that average cost is $45 an acre, plus weeds are still present harvest time costing yield, works out to roughly $60 an acre. Just keep that number in mind. So it's not just an Australian problem, right? Like, this is glyphosate-resistant kochia in southern Alberta. What was the study here? 2012, 5% of the 309 sites that they surveyed had glyphosate-resistant kochia. Fast forward now to 2017, they did it again. Now 53% of those sites have glyphosate-resistant kochia. So it's coming, and it's coming hard. This is just some tests done in our area on wild oats, one that scares me. So, you know, on our farm, we've got issues with Group 1 and Group 2 resistant wild oats, and this is just some surveys or some weed tests to show it. You know, and one that really scares me is just the Group 2. Like, look at the levels of resistance to Group 2, you know, and that scares me a bit. Here's another couple other tests, all such high resistant levels to Group 2 chemistries. The other thing to bear in mind with, like I do stress it later on, is keep up with your resistance testings on your farm, because you might find that even some of these say for wild oats, these Group 1 chemistries still have some good efficacy, you know, and they're cheap. So even if you might come back with a test like here, look at this. So up top here, so the clethodim, which we can use in our canola or lentils, I believe, you know, only 5% resistant seeds there, so it's still fairly effective. And this is one that I stole from Hugh Becky, who's actually gone down under now. This is just showing your options to control wild oats if you've lost your Group 1 and Group 2 chemistries. There ain't much there, and it's really only suppressions. It's the soil residual stuff. So that kind of puts me at this point. Just kidding. I'm just trying to be funny. So, you know, and that's where I think we can take look at the Australian way a bit, and a lot of those Australian growers, they're the ones that have initiated a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about, but they've just kind of got rid of the box, you know, they're thinking right outside, and I think we could learn from that. So I'll just go through a bit through the Australian cycle. So at the crop planting stage, weeds absolutely drive their farms. You know, there's a famous quote out there down under that, you know, the guy said, who's driving your farm? You know, and a lot of Australian farms, the weeds are driving it. On our farm up here, just north of Saskatoon, it's more what did we grow last year? Now what are we going to grow? It's not, geez, that back 300 acres is overrun with wild oats. We're going to have to get out of grass crops for a while to get this population down. Or kochia's coming in hard, maybe we get in cereal phase and get as many modes of action out there as we can. It's more just what did we grow last year? That's not the case in Australia. And I'll just touch on an industry that has been created down under to deal with this harvest wheat, these weed problems is export hay. It's a pretty massive industry now in some areas, and it's great. Like they seed their crops, they don't use much for chemistry. It's just a little bit early just to get the populations down, and then you're going in there like you would do if you're doing silage or making green feed. You're collecting those weed seeds and then exporting them off the field. So one point I always stress here is never buy any hay from Australia. It's full of weeds. Right? Some other points here is just crop competition, you know, like can't stress the higher seeding rates. We've got to do everything we can agronomically to try and beat these weeds. Other technologies, you've probably heard of the Weed It. That's pretty awesome. Just goes along and sprays the weeds that it sees so you can keep your robust rates going, not generally cut. Not that we are cutting rates, but that's one thing we should not be doing. But, you know, you think about it. We're going out to do a spring burn off, right? All of a sudden we just see a few little weeds popping up, but there's just a few big ones out there. We're not generally going to make a brew for the few big ones, which is what we should do, but it's too expensive. This machine allows you to do that. These machines out there actually have a dual line boom, so you've got a front line that's got the sensors that can sense anything bigger than a quarter, sprays it, and you can just run a second line with a lower rate to get the small stuff. Another big one I always touch on is just the double knock pre-burn. So a lot of farmers down there will do a glyphosate spray with tank mix partners and then often wait a week and then come back and spray again before seeding with, say, a gramoxone or just almost like a Liberty type chemical, just to burn off any survivors. But that's time, and oftentimes not what we have here in Western Canada, being that as soon as that snows melt, we want to get out there. But if we're forced to in a spot where a lot of our in-crop chemistries aren't working and we have to get everything we can with a broad spectrum sprays, then that could cost us a week on seeding. And just seed, they've also found a study found in Australia that by seeding down there east-west versus north-south, reduced annual ryegrass seed set by up to 50%, just through the shading, which you can kind of see here. Now, I don't believe that's going to be as effective here just because of they are seeding the same time as us, but going into winter, so the sun is lower in the sky, where we have a lot of sun going on in the summertime, so maybe not. But even still, if just a simple direction change on your GPS could reduce our weed set population by 20%, it might be worth it. And really the big one that I'm here to talk about, or two I guess, is just the notion of at least using 2 active modes of action on your weed spectrums. And when I say active, they've got to be ones that aren't already resistant, right? It's got to be modes of action that still have efficacy, and the notion of harvest weed seed control. Yeah, I can't stress the maximum chemical rate. That's really a no-brainer. You know, like early days, when a weed is sprayed with a new chemistry, you can probably get away with lower rates. But the problem is that you're selecting for resistance faster. So we've got to keep the rates high. And just the notion of appropriate water rates, doing everything we can, like read the label and actually do it. Like it's there for a reason. Don't cut back. It's going to cost us. And we already are seeing it. Often a lot of herbicide-resistant weeds are coming from the half-rate zone, so whether that is cutting rates or it's on the end of a spray boom. So let's just imagine this room as a field. You know, the walls could be tree line. Well, every time we've sprayed that for the last 30 years, there's always a half-rate zone on the outside edge, right? It's where the sprayer peters out. Or year after year after year, it's a half-rate zone. So you might get, as you can see, these weeds will be resistant, then set seeds, and they slowly make their way in, especially when you get the big 40-foot header fronts, grab them, bring them in to 20 feet, then you go on again and again. So Australian guys are getting out there and spraying these areas, like they're putting spray packs on the back of their trucks and going and spraying all these half-rate zones. Like it's a huge job, but pretty effective. So at harvest time, often a lot of guys are setting up spray bars on their windrows or swathers. You know, often it's a place where maybe all the weeds, you might have a weed that's come through, and a majority of them probably already are at that place to set seed, but some on that plant could still be immature. Well, instead of waiting and doing that post-harvest spray, if you get it that 2 or 3 weeks earlier, it's just a chance to get a bit more of a handle on that seed set. Now, it's not perfect, but it's just reducing the numbers. It's just a numbers game. Combine hygiene's huge. We just purchased a big air compressor, but usually we'd rent one because we only need it one time of the year, and that was usually before we put the combine in the shed. But this is a tool that's often on the field every single day on Australian grain farms, because if they're in a field that they've got some resistant weeds, they're not about to go and spread them to a potential clean field. So it's just about blowing off what you can. It's sort of the same with the club root, right? Like, just get as much dirt off as you possibly can. Doing something is better than nothing. And the notion of harvest weed seed control. So this to me is a real linchpin. I believe that, I'll talk more about it, but I just feel that harvest weed seed control, like Australian growers are adapting it like crazy, and I've got some data to show, but it's just a point where, you know, often any weeds that might be present at harvest time have got through everything we might have done that season, right? So it's got through our sprays, it might have got through our narrow row spacings. Like, it's the weeds that are the most fittest, in a sense, that have got through our system. And to me, to do nothing with them is a mistake. You're just going to spread them back out and let them go again next year. You're rewarding the survivors. So this is a technology that's just running rampant in Australia now, and it's very effective if you can get the weeds into your header front. Now, that's an issue with some weeds, but what's some of your big weeds down here? Kosher for sure, mustards, you know, good seed set there. Now, I know kosher's Christmas tree and it's 30,000 seeds, and probably 5,000 of them you're not going to be able to cut, but if you can get 25,000, you're still reducing that selection pressure, aren't you? So windrow burning is the most widely adopted harvest weed seed control technique in Australia, just because it is the cheapest. You make a quick little chute, collecting all the straw and all the chaff into a narrow row that you can get a nice hot fire. Now, hot fire and Australian summer sometimes don't mix, so it's a pretty hazardous kind of thing to be doing, but super effective. Now, I know I say it's the cheapest, but it's not really. because there's a lot of residue that you're burning there, and there's data to show that you can be losing quite a few dollars per acre of potassium just lost in that, right? But it's very effective. Chaff lining, chaff carts, Canadian inventions, the Aussies stole it to collect their weed seeds and do something with it. Super effective again, but once again, at least this type now, all the types I talk about from now on, we're just collecting the chaff component, not the straw. Straw's going back out and getting spread. If your combine's set up right, 98% of your seeds should be in the chaff component. So like, pretty obvious, chaff cart, collecting the chaff, making dumps or whatever, burning them. The chaff lining is another one that's used on a lot of farms, especially where they're into controlled traffic farming, just collecting those seeds, putting them on the tram tracks and running over them all year. Perfect. Bale direct, another one that's collecting everything again though, so all the chaff, all the straw, and then removing it off. This is really the pinnacle, is the integrated meals. I want to talk about the Sate Terminator quite a bit. But this is where you are just collecting just the chaff and pulverising it. We ran one of these on our harvester last year at Osler, so just north of Saskatoon. If you don't believe me, ask Corey, he was there collecting chaff. Have you got all the chaff out of your ears yet, or what? It was just going everywhere. But this is where it's at, I believe. You're just collecting just the chaff, pulverising it and putting it all back on the ground again. So this is just a quick little graph to show the adoption levels. This is a study done in Australia. I think this was 2016 or 17. 43% of Australian farmers are adopting some form of harvest weed seed control, and they forecast in the next 5 years how many? It'd be up to 80. So it's proven, it's working. Yeah, and just from this, from collecting these weeds, we all get caught up with, oh, well, too many shell out and whatever. But there's studies to show even if you can collect 50% of those weed seeds at harvest time, you can buy time, buy up to 10 years of, reducing the resistance levels. So, but this technique is allowing the farmers in Australia to gain control of their farms again. They're not being run by what weed populations they have. They can do what they want again. And this is sort of the power of it, right? Like, you've seen plenty of John Deere combines out there, right? That's what it looks like out the back. Just kidding. I shouldn't say that's what we run. But it's the power of it. If you can collect it and do something, here's a narrow Windrow Burn, for example. Look at it. This is my other joke for the day. That's the problem, right? You've got to get a class. That's what's happening in our area. Even Oprah gets it. So this is just a little slide I found, and there's a lot of stuff here, but it's just talking about, so in the spring, you grow your crop and just certain choke points, so whether you post-emergent herbicides or enhanced crop competition, but it's just the choke point, and harvest weed seed control I feel like is a critical choke point, because I mentioned before, often any weeds that are resistant to what we've done are present at harvest time. So why spread them out again? Let's do something with them. This is another little study in Australia just showing, you say you got weed level at 100%, you do whatever you do throughout the year, you get it down, but you have just a few survivors, you spread them, often you can be up again. But if you can do something here, you can start driving those populations down. Another study in Australia just showing a farmer that uses harvest weed seed control on the bottom here, and then who doesn't use harvest weed seed control, and you can see that you can just get those numbers right down. So you're thinking, oh, it's all Australian work, right? But this is some work done in the US on pigweeds, similar to our kochers and weeds like that. Even their modelling is showing that just by adopting some sort of harvest weed seed control, even at a 50% level, can really buy us some time with our farming system. And because the power that we have here, I believe, is that we have a lot of our chemical modes of action still available. So if we can integrate this harvest weed seed control, even if we're not getting perfect efficacy out of it, I feel like we can buy a lot of time with our chemistries as well. So what can we do? Obviously, good agronomy equals good weed control. So just do your higher seeding rates, competitive crops, spray early, don't wait till it's too late. Just all that sort of stuff you know already. Herbicide layering, that's key, and too active. Can't stress the active part enough. You can have 10 different modes of action in the tank, but if you've already got 9 resistant, then it doesn't work, does it? You still got 1. It's like this dicamba thing in the US. They've got their Roundup Ready Extend or whatever it's called. It's hopeless. Glyphosate's already resistant. They're just using dicamba. How long is that going to last? And I feel that we should start adopting some forms of harvest weed seed control now. Before we're forced into it. The technologies aren't cheap, but I'll prove it. Once again, I'll show you some economics. This is the layering part. So forget the harvest weed seed control. This is just the power of making sure we have at least 2 active modes of action in our spray tanks against the weed populations that we're trying to kill. If you got one, you know, like if you're using one year after year, you're going to start getting resistance. We can see that. We're already showing it on our farms. But if you can get 2 or 3, you can really just lower that risk of developing resistance. But not saying you're still going to get resistance, because it's proven, even in Australia, they're finding that they're getting some cross resistance to even chemistries they haven't even used yet, just because the chemistries, there's only a certain number of ways you can kill a weed with chemicals. So I don't think there's going to be silver bullets coming down the pipeline because of that. This just illustrates that notion of tank mixing again. Quickly, the red line is just showing no diversity in your spraying. This is what was talked about a few years ago, like the rotation. What you use this year, don't use next year, and then use something the year after, but that doesn't work because of hard seednesses. Like if all the weed seeds come up next year, oh, for sure it'll work, but they don't, do they? Like they keep coming. And just the power of at least 2 active modes of action. I can't stress the active part enough. And just the economics, right? Like this is, I started talking about this on the farm. I could see the freight train coming. We're just spraying so much glyphosate on its own. I was like, holy smokes, like how's this going to work? And I started looking at it and it's okay, one year we had a blowout of wild oats in a clearfield canola field, and I was like, oh, this isn't good because we just used group 2. So I just started looking at it and said, okay, was a standard practice. This is basically just a wheat canola farm. Diversity is king too, so get more crops out there. I think you did better than us. We're getting better. But I just challenge you to do this on your own farm. Like, look at your herbicide budget now. This is just showing roughly we're spending $26 an acre. 5 years ago, when we started seeing a few of these blowouts, okay, let's think of the old chemistries. I used a lot of Avidex and trifluridine on our home farm back in Oz. Let's incorporate some of these. Let's get 2 active modes of action. As you can see, I've got a couple more modes of action now, at least more than 1 anyway. On a third of the farm, it didn't go up by much, $4 an acre. This is where we're at now. We're making sure we've got at least 2 active modes of action on the 3 weed species that really concern me, being wild oats, kosher and cleavers in our area. Another $4. So basically, it's just showing that, and I should pretense that by a way that, a lot of, in our system, it's probably different here, but with canola, the Liberty Links and Roundups, there's a lot of 2-pass spraying going on. I went away from that and just went the high 1-rate sprays, but incorporated the soil residual herbicide. So it just freed up a few dollars in there. So this is just a quick summary of it. And I just do it with your agronomist on your own farm. But like this was a standard practice, by incorporating at least 2 active modes of action on a few of these areas on the farm, I knew we had problems. It didn't cost a lot on the total farm budget. And then doing it on the whole farm, up an extra 8. But if we just remember that $60 an acre in Australia, not even close. And even just the notion of early weed removal, I feel pays for it, like there's lots of data. This is Saskatchewan government data, I believe, anyway, on peas, but just showing that if you can remove the weeds early, you can gain, this red line is just showing how much I needed to gain to get my $8 back. Not much, 2%. And just another notion here is just I talked about the resistance developing to sublethal doses around the outside of field edges or cutting rates or spraying with a sprayer that maybe doesn't have the aim command or whatever, and you've got the, not a very big rate out there, but a lethal rate on the inside of the boom. But this is a study done in the US again, just showing like with the pigweed, that they found that after, I think it was only a couple of generations of a sublethal dose to dicamba, it was resistant already. So it got me thinking a bit. I stole this from Tom Wolfe. Thanks, Tom. Some sublethal dose scenarios in our farming systems. So it's obviously spraying when the weeds are too big, or you got shading from the crop. Boom. If you're spraying at 25 mile an hour and the boom's doing this, how much of that's vaporising before it hits the ground? And just this notion of the swing That's really what opened my eyes up, was just the boom swing. And you think, oh yeah, makes sense. But it's this point here, this is one of our fields, a few sloughs. But obviously, over the last 30 years, we've got sublethal dose ranges here, here, you know what I mean? Like they just start adding up. This is a machine that I'm pretty excited to talk about, really. This is, I believe, it's the pinnacle of harvest weed seed control. So it's called the Sate Terminator. And we ran this machine. This is us up there at Osler last year. We ran it on one of our 680s and it just worked flawlessly. Yeah, my cousin invented it, so that's part of the reason why I've got it here. And I was concerned, you know, we were trying to find out how's it going to go up here in North America. We don't exactly have the easiest harvest conditions, as was pointed last year. I was kind of make a joke to Nick, you know, if I knew that the harvest last year was going to be the way it was, I would have said, hold this thing in Australia, this ain't going to work. But to its credit, it worked flawlessly. Like, we didn't even know it was there, you know, so that was super encouraging. So just a bit of evolution of the Sate Terminator. You know, as we talked about, basically every farmer has got weed seeds at harvest time, right? Like they're there. Maybe not in big populations, but there's probably one or two out there. And often, like we talk about, they could be the ones that are resistant to what we did throughout the year. So rather than reward them, let's just terminate them. That's the philosophy. Yeah, so basically, as you can see, the Sate Terminator philosophy is just to stimulate change and make the biggest possible difference to world food production in the shortest amount of time is what they're trying to do with a non-chemical approach and as cheap as possible as well. This is Nick, my cousin. Yeah, like the guy is just so focused on this. You know, he's basically, he went through university and his his PhD was to incorporate the toe behind seed destructor and how we can get it into the back of the combine. But what I like about Nick is that Nick is a farmer as well, and he's absolutely focused to deliver this technology to farmers. And another quote that one of his guys that he's worked with, I've mentioned at the bottom here, but like really you got this technology, you should, maybe if you just go after the big name brands, right? Get as many out there as you possibly can. But last year he worked tirelessly towards before harvest started in Australia and got it onto some Massey Ferguson combines. Like they're not a big market share down there, but that's his philosophy, and it has been since day one, is to get it to the farmers and as many farmers as possible. So he's a pretty incredible dude. This is just a bit of it's such new technology, so there's a lot of engineering, but there's a full loop circle going on there between farmers and the technology. So what is it? So basically this machine, I haven't got a great picture there, but it's a multi-stage hammer mill. If you can imagine at the back of the sieves, and then you got your chopper. On our machine anyway, we just back the chopper up a couple hundred mils, and then this thing just plugs in there. And all it's doing is just collecting the chaff and pulverizing it. It's simple drive. It just comes off one of the drive pulleys off the chopper of the 680. Anyway, if you're familiar with the John Deere 680s, you have a high speed and low speed chopper drive. Often you're never using the slow speed, so we just stole the drive from there. So you've got a cage, like a stationary cage, and then you've got a rotating hammer on the inside that's just pulverizing it through this screen. So the first year was 2006. The other thing with this company too is it's all basically producer driven. Like Nick went out early days and had 9 or 8 machines. That was all farmers put their money in to help him get going. Like he's done it on his own, hasn't had a lot of big industry funding to help. Started with 8. You know, it worked pretty well. They had some issues with the driveline and whatever else. Back to the drawing board, got that figured out. 2017, had 32 machines. Driveline worked really well this time, just issues with wear. So back to the drawing board again. So last year, there was 81 machines, 80 in Australia and 1 in Canada, and worked flawlessly really. A few little minor hiccups, but got the wear issue sorted out, driveline's working sweet. So now it's really going mainstream. There's a lot of farmers looking to adopt this technology now. So this was us, just rocked up in a little box there. 24 hours, we had it plugged in the back of our combine. So you can see from the picture here, it just plugs in the back here. As I mentioned, the chopper drops up, it comes up a bit, plugs in, and away you go. This is just a video. So this is just us and some barley crop, roughly a 75, 80 bushel barley crop. And what I found running this thing all season is that I didn't notice it was there. We find that with the higher horsepower on these machines, that it's our sieving area that slows us down, so it wasn't the Terminator that was slowing us down. So there you can see we're dropping the straw at this point, we're just collecting the chaff and just smashing it. And nothing more satisfying, especially when you hit a patch of weeds. Here's another one in some canola. It's about a 50 bushel canola crop. The only issue we had with it was, for this, as I said, it's just collecting the chaff component, but on the back of or on the John Deere or case, John Deere or case, you know how you've got the discharge beater at the back of the rotor, or there's that beater that's supposed to give the product like straw velocity to get over the back of the sieves. We just had trouble with any green material. It would just fall straight down the sieves and block the shoots, wouldn't necessarily block the meal. But he's got a fix for that now. He's got an extended little chaff that goes at the back of the discharge beater there, and just makes sure the stuff gets over top. If you've got a Claas or I think Massey's, it's all separated anyway, so it's not a problem. It's pretty happy at that point. Yeah, so just some key points that when you're practicing harvest weed seed controls, we had to pay the utmost attention to making sure our weeds were getting into that chaff. If you're driving too fast and you're flying out the rotor with all your canola seed or your grain, well, that's no good anyway. But then it's not going to work. So you've got to make sure the chaff is getting out of the separating system and get onto the chaff bed. Flex headers are good just because you can get closer to the ground and collect more of those weeds. And swathing too. I feel like swathing is going to play more and more of a part here. There's a lot of Australian farmers who have gone back to swathing just because, imagine your crop's ready on day 0. Well, you can often go and swath that maybe 10 days earlier. But you're going to collect a lot more weed seeds and get them in a swath, especially wild oats. Not that we want to do that, but if we're forced to, we might have to. And I can't stress it being a numbers game. It is an absolute numbers game. We just need to do as much as we can at different choke points along the way and just reduce that population. So I found that running this machine, we use basically 1 litre extra of fuel. So basically $1 an acre there. Once again, the economics of it, this thing is roughly 100 grand, yikes, but with an adaptation kit of 50 to 20,000. But the thing is, you know that it's proven now, it's got longevity. You finance this thing over 4 years at 5%, and if you're doing 4,000 acres on a harvest, or maybe you're doing a little less, $1 an acre for fuel, $5,000 a year for repairs and maintenance, which is probably high. You know, roughly 42 a year, it's $10.50 an acre. So mate, if you're at 3,500 a combine, maybe it's $12. But what's a single spray costing you? And I really wonder whether we can perhaps displace a spray pass in for this machine. It's not proven, but I'm wondering whether we can. I feel like harvest weed seed control could be as effective as a soil residual spray. Just the efficacy of them ain't great, and maybe not harvest weed seed control either, but I like the idea of the harvest weed seed control just because, you know, you might spend $10 on that residual spray or $10 on this thing, but if you're doing it at the harvest end of the season, that's where all the potential resistant weeds are, right? And I know I'm not saying like we should do it all, but it's all economics, and this is big numbers. But maybe in a situation now where we're not having to do this, we can get this technology out there and get it paid for, and then go back to doing maybe like I showed on my spreadsheet earlier on, go back to spraying 1/3 of the farm with a couple of modes of action or whatever. But yeah, anyway. And there Sate Terminator looking to get an extra 4 units over here this year. We're going to take another one, so we'll have 2 of our machines set up. 3 more special introductory prices. It's not the numbers that I just quoted, it's much less. If you are interested, talk to me. Get on the website. I think it's a good opportunity to get on this stuff at the ground level. So like I said, we've got to do more with our weeds. Try and hit as many choke points as we possibly can. At least have 2 active modes of actions at the start, because we can do that with our sprayer. It's easy. It's another jug in the sprayer. We've got to be doing that. And harvest weed seed control is not going to be the silver bullet, but I feel like it's definitely a massive part of it. And you're not having to do another pass. You're not having to do any tillage. I should have mentioned that before, but some Australian farmers are having to resort back to the moldball plough just to invert those weed seeds a foot. We don't want to be doing that, especially in a dry climate that we farm here. And I'm a little concerned even for my generation with what chemistries we're going to have available, but let alone the young fella there, if he wants to farm or not, I'm not sure. But I think we're in a unique situation here that we can learn from other areas in the world. And I think it'd be a mistake if we didn't, just put a few of these things in practice now while we have the hindsight on our side for future generations. Thanks for your attention.